Hi, Romans here and welcome to another installment in my Worst to Best series, where I take a discography of a certain group and I rank all of their studio albums going from worst to best based on my own personal opinion. I also review all of the albums from a viewpoint of a musician, as I'm a singer, songwriter and a bass player for my own group Jakobe, and last year we have released our debut album called Pursuits in Life. What makes it unique is that it's a pretty heavy prog rock without guitars. Instead you have drums, bass, saxophone and keyboards. You can check out 3 of our music videos on my YouTube channel. We're building our monument, a studio live take of A Way to Oppose, and our latest music video, Fake the New Kind of Beauty. In the description of all those music videos you will find all the information about where is the record available. It's available on all digital platforms like Spotify, Tidal, Deezer, also on the Bandcamp, but also in this digipack version of a CD with a very beautifully illustrated 20 pages long booklet. So in case you want one, all you need to do is contact me via an email or through Instagram or Facebook, and you can get one also through Bandcamp. And today I'm going to rank all of the studio albums from one of my all-time favorite bands from Poland, Riverside.
Music review. Music review.
In current prog music there are 3 bands that are pushing the envelope the most in my opinion, and those are Leprous, Haken and Riverside. I've been a fan of Riverside for like 10 years. I've seen them live once. I almost seen them live this year as well when they were having a tour for Wasteland, but unfortunately I got sick and had to sell my tickets. Riverside have released 7 studio albums, 2 EPs and Eye of the Soundscape, which is like an instrumental double album. So I'm going to include 9 of these, so I'm also going to include the Memories in My Head EP. I'm not going to talk about the Voices in My Head EP because that's only 20 minutes of music, so I wanted to look at the longer releases. So this was a pretty difficult list to make because even though I was pretty sure about my number 9 and my numbers 1 and 2, the rest of the albums I was pretty hesitant about. So let's start. At number 9 I have the latest studio album from Riverside called Wasteland from 2018. It came out like 9 months ago. This album has a pretty specific mood, I'll give it that. Maybe it's because of the time when I was listening to the album. That was in October when it came out and I was sick, which you can kind of hear on the video when I made a review for this album. And there wasn't much to do in my bed as I was getting better, so I was having a nostalgic trip down the memory lane and I played Half-Life 2 computer game, which is set in a post-apocalyptic world very similar to that depicted by the album Wasteland, and also with October being like the late autumn. This is kind of what I see every time I think back to the album, and I kind of like that mood. I'm not gonna go into too much detail because I made a separate review for that, so you can check that out, but I still stand for almost everything I said about the album. To sum it up, the keyboards and drums are too much in the background, and this album seems to be about the bass guitars and electric guitars and acoustic guitars, so most of which were recorded by Mariáš Duda, and this really seems like Duda's solo album. There are some really good tracks, like for example Lament. Father, will you take me? Father, will you take and save me from my pain? Father, will... Then very Pink Floydish River Down Below.
Only one wish before you go. Before I crumble back into the dust, take me to the river down below.
I also like Acid Rain.
I'm your crime, swept under the carpet, your vanity, without consequence.
Or very emotional The Night Before. But that's pretty much it. I think that the album lacks from memorable moments. It doesn't have way too many of them, and even though I'm probably more fond of it now, as when I did a review for it, I still consider this to be the weakest album from Riverside. Number 8, Eye of the Soundscape from 2016. This is an instrumental double album and it's only at number 8 because it has very little in common with the rest of their discography. It's by no means a bad album, I actually think it's really great, so I'm gonna explain why it's here. First of all, electronic elements were always a crucial part of the Riverside's music, especially on the first 3-4 albums, but this album focuses only on the electronic music. And many of the tracks on this double album have been released before. For example, on CD1 we have Night Sessions volumes 1 and 2. Which were released on the deluxe version of the Shrine of New Generation Slaves. Also, majority of the material on CD2 has been released in form of a bonus disc for the album Love, Fear and the Time Machine. So this is the reason why I don't have the album, because I have the deluxe versions of the other albums, so I didn't want to buy it because of a few additional tracks. But I like that they released it because it showed that those electronic instrumentals were not just some material that they kind of wrote in their spare time and then just, you know, released it as bonus tracks, but that they were standing behind it and they considered it to be a crucial part of Riverside's discography. The music presented on this double album is much more in the style of Tangerine Dream or Mike Oldfield, so there might be people who would enjoy this music or this double album but wouldn't necessarily enjoy Riverside's discography and vice versa, so that's why it's here. So this is definitely not a very good album to get familiar with Riverside, but I personally enjoyed it and I think it's very good for what it is. Number 7, Rapid Eye Movement from 2007. Well, this is actually a Reality Dream trilogy that includes their first 3 albums. This is one of the biggest buyer's remorses I've ever had because I bought it. It includes their first 3 albums with some bonus discs, but there's no booklet. How can you make a box like this and not have a booklet? I was actually thinking about returning this album, but as I really love Riverside, I just wanted to support them, so I kept it. So, Rapid Eye Movement. The reason why this album ended up here is that it uses the same formula as their first 2 albums, but unlike Second Life Syndrome, it didn't really improve upon it, and there are just many things we have heard already on their first 2 albums, despite the fact that actually this album contains some of their best tracks. The first 5 tracks are really amazing. For example, the first one, Beyond the Eyelids, has an awesome melodic beginning. And then some heavy riffs. This is pretty much everything Riverside were about on their first 3 albums. Then Rainbow Box is a bit jazzy. O2 Panic Room has awesome atmosphere. I also like Schizophrenic Prayer with those breath effects that he uses. It very much reminds me of the Prince of Persia Warrior Within soundtrack. Also, Parasomnia is amazing. The album gets a bit weaker later on when we have 2 acoustic tracks, Through the Other Side and Embryonic, which are both kind of samey and I probably wouldn't have put them next to each other. And the last 2 tracks of the album are also great, Cybernetic Pillow and a great 12 minutes long Ultimate Trip. So this is generally a very, very good album, and I think that if you enjoy their first 2 albums, you will enjoy this one as well, but you will not be as captivated by it if you have listened to their first 2 albums before. Number 6, Love, Fear and the Time Machine from 2015. This is an album that I have a very weird relationship with. Initially when it came out, I really loved it. Then I didn't. That was at the time when I shot the Wasteland review. Then when I returned to it, I started liking it again. What's that about? What I really like about this record is how much they redefined their style and their sound. This was the third album where they completely redefined themselves, and this is also their happiest sounding album. On their first 5 albums, Riverside were anything but happy. Their emotional spectrum was more into melancholy, aggression, heaviness, mystery, but never really happiness. And this is why this album came as a bit of a shock, but maybe positive shock to most of their fans, because it's just so uplifting. Also, in my opinion, it's a pretty perfect fit for a autumn walk in a park. This is how I actually listened to this album last time, and this is how I started liking it again. The first track, Lost, pretty much sets the mood for the whole record. It's very uplifting, free, relaxed.
Come follow me, we'll go down where the river flows. One day just you and I will find the bridge.
And it continues with the following tracks like Under the Pillow, even though it has some heavier parts, which we can hear throughout the record, but they never really overtake the album and they never really break the overall vibe of the album. Addicted is like a Steven Wilson kind of influenced song, very accessible.
So you won't recognize me when I am in the crowd. I lost my compass in the world where everything is such a dreaming inside.
Also Caterpillar and the Barbed Wire or Saturate Me, which has again some heavier riffs, but the song in itself is not really that heavy. The first big change on the album comes with the track Discard Your Fear, which is definitely the best track on the album in my opinion and one of their best songs. I absolutely love it. There's this great bass groove. And also the chorus is just so good. This was the first song released from the album and I got so excited for the album. Towards the Blue Horizon starts like a very poppy Anathema song with acoustic guitars. It's very catchy, but then the album gets pretty heavy and dark and there are some of the heaviest parts on the album. The last 2 tracks are both okay but kind of samey. I probably wouldn't have put them next to each other because they kind of sound like one song that goes on for too long. But generally, I think that Love, Fear and the Time Machine is a very nice album, and especially that album cover. I mean, that's one of my all-time favorite album covers. I love it, and this album cover actually inspired me to what kind of a color spectrum I wanted on front cover of my album. Number 5, Memories in My Head, EP from 2011. So this is when I saw Riverside live. They were having 10th anniversary and they were selling these EPs. I have it signed by Mariáš Duda. Despite this being an EP, it is 32 minutes long album, and that was a pretty standard length of a record in like 70s. So for me personally, this is an album. With this release, it seems like they were still standing with one leg in a metal territory, but with another leg they were leaving it, and they would never really play metal after this album. Also, there are some similarities between Memories in My Head and the album Wasteland, and personally I think this is how Wasteland should have sounded, because Wasteland had a lot of these sonic soundscapes and Memories in My Head is very similar in that regard. For example, Goodbye Sweet Innocence has just these big sonic soundscapes that it creates. I really love it. Then the second track is much darker and heavier, called Living in the Past, which is my personal favorite on the album. Especially, I love those proggy parts. And also very groovy, Forgotten Lands is just great track.
There was a kingdom here, a city full of life. Songs of its praise were being sung by the mountain.
I think that this is kind of an overlooked release from Riverside, maybe because of that EP after the title, but I think it's as good as they can get. Number 4, I yet again have to use this, Out of Myself from 2003. So this was the Riverside's debut album, and it put them on the map because of their unique blend of styles that they're presented on their debut album. It was like a prog rock music with the elements of oriental music, with some death metal growls, some melancholic ambience and some electronics. And this is kind of showcased in the first track of the album, The Same River. The second track, Out of Myself, has beautiful keys.
I'm really scared of getting lost in real life, so please stop asking me for more. Let me get this straight, let me get this right. I need a place to be alone.
And this is one of the things that I miss so much on the Wasteland album. I think that Micha Lapai is such a phenomenal keyboard player, and I absolutely love his keyboard textures on this album. Of course, all of the musicians in Riverside are phenomenal. Mariáš Duda is still one of the biggest heroes for me in terms of bass playing and songwriting, but I mean, you just have to take a moment here and appreciate Micha Lapai and his keyboards. Then we have acoustic ballad I Believe, which is in a 5/4 time signature, and I really like the backing vocals here.
I really care this moment, I believe, and I want so much in spite of everything.
Then we have 2 instrumentals, Reality Dream 1 and 2. Both are phenomenal. I really like these tracks. Loose Heart is so emotional, and yet again, these keyboards, I love them.
All those feelings went away. I may not be what you think I am. Think we ought to find out.
Then we have an acoustic song in 2 Minds, which is very uplifting and creates a big contrast to everything that came before it. And then the album continues with The Curtain Falls, which is kind of in the same way. And the album ends with a very swingy and melancholic OK, which is pretty interesting ending of the album. Number 3, Shrine of New Generation Slaves from 2013. Fans sometimes refer to this album as Songs. This was their first true prog rock album, and I yet again love how much they redefined themselves. This was one of the 3 albums where they just pretty much took a different turn with every release, and I don't really know about many prog bands like this. The first track, New Generation Slave, pretty much sets that 70s Deep Purple vibe, and it seems like the whole record is this combination of contemporary prog rock with that 70s riffing a la Deep Purple. And this is continued in the song Celebrated Touch, which they shot their second music video for, and I like that there is this badass riff. But the song actually has a pretty unpredictable progression where it gets more into a ambient prog rock territory, something nobody would probably expect. Then Feel Like Falling has this really groovy synthy riff, and again we hear this 70s riffing in the middle, which I really like. The depth of Self-Delusion kind of hints at the direction they would take with the follow-up album, Love, Fear and the Time Machine. Then We Got Used to Us is a beautiful melancholic track. I really love that piano with the delay.
How we could forget. We made a promise to one another that nothing would ever break what.
The first time I heard the track, I fell in love with it. Then we have Deprived, which is almost a jazzy track with a very heavy and unbearable emotional impact. and even that saxophone at the end makes the song even that more unbearable in my opinion. Escalator Shrine has those, again, sonic soundscapes that Riverside always excelled in. This is a prog track with everything that a prog track should have, like 70s Hammond, 70s riffing.
Used to have a love, and now disposable.
Very emotional, heavy ending with those vocals. Really love this track. Number 2, have to use the box again, Second Life Syndrome from 2005. This is an album that majority of the fans consider to be their best album, and I can definitely see why. This is probably a really great album to start with when it comes to Riverside. With this album they took everything that was great about the first album, Out of Myself, and they improved upon it in every possible way. It has an ambient opener with great vocals after, and then Volta Phase is amazing, pretty much everything that Riverside are about. Then melancholic piano ballad for Autumn, Conceiving You.
My world, I'm still running away. It's crazy, I know. I've been conceiving you for too long.
Then we have 2 longer tracks, more than 15 minutes long. Title track.
When I'm shattered, I felt broken my fall. Couldn't pretend that I felt so much anymore. Without your help, I find stuff.
And around 11 minutes long, Dancing with Shadow. Both of these tracks are brilliant. Artificial Smile is great. Then we have a bit brighter, I Turned You Down, an instrumental, Reality Dream 3, again fantastic track. And a very heavy closer, Before. This is definitely their most challenging album to listen to, which means that you will probably have to spend the most time with this album to really get familiar with it, but it is well worth the time. Okay, and we're getting to number 1, so ADHD, or Anno Domini High Definition from 2009. So this is definitely their heaviest album, and also the first one I was exposed to. And it just seems that this was the album where they focused more on their metal side. The first track, Hyperactive, starts with almost a catchy piano melody, but essentially transforms into a very chaotic psycho prog metal song with electronics and with some death growls. The second track, Driven to Destruction, is very reminiscent of their first 3 albums, but this may actually be my most favorite track from Riverside, and I love those oriental vibes that remind me of the soundtrack for Prince of Persia: Warrior Within. Then we have melodic and groovy, Egoist, Hedonist. I really love the melody of the track. Then I like those horn emulating keyboards that are really great, and also there are some electronic synthesizers. Then we have slightly more mellow and melancholic piece, Left Out, with really great piano parts. And the final track, Hybrid Times, is just such a badass song. I especially love that obsession part where he screams and then we hear that great bass riff.
It's my obsession, 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 obsession.
Oh, this is my probably one of my all-time favorite records, and I just absolutely love it. So there you have it, Riverside from worst to best. So if you are a fan of Riverside, you can let me know in the comment section below whether you agreed with me or not. What is your own list of their albums going from worst to best? If you like this video, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe. You can check out my own original music, and if you're a fan of Riverside, I think you are going to like it a lot. You can check out my live performances, my reviews, and quite a lot of other worst to best videos as well. So thanks a lot for watching.